thank you very much for staying tuned. So first is that we have social media handles. You must have seen the social media handle projected. Sorry, what happened? It's not. Sorry? No? Okay, so there are social media handles we encourage you to look at. Either you follow them. So our Twitter handle is as UKNAV. LinkedIn is there. It's a long address, and you can also visit the UKNAV website for further information. We hope to have other activities that will be of interest to you, and also maybe share other information or materials that will be of interest. So please just take note of these addresses. You can follow our Twitter handle so that you are consistently up to date with what's going on with UKNAV, and we will use that handle to share information as well. So first, let's start by responding to some questions. The first one is about the difference between public finance management and public investment management. And so there is a reference material that Philip has shared. We're just going to upload that to all participants. So you can download that and basically just read through the difference. The second one is about the project he made reference to in Ghana. And so he has shared a material that has information on that project. It's about the title of the material is I think it's political economy of projects. Is it uncompleted projects? Sorry, what's going on? Okay, so we're going to share those materials for you to basically read through and get responses to those questions. Philip has made those materials available, and we will make sure you have access to them before the end of today, and you can download all of them. Okay, so let's just see if we have. Let's just see if we have other questions we can take before we start with Abdul. Hello, David. Can you hear me? We can't hear you. I cannot hear you, David. I don't know what's going on. So, can any other person hear David? Maybe it's just me. You are me now. Okay, there are some questions to Wolemi. I don't know, Wolemi, are you still on? Okay, political economy of corruption and abandoned projects. So there, Philip has shared the material for that. For Wolemi, I don't think Wolemi is still on, but we're just going to compile these questions and you'll get responses. David, can you check your system again? Can anybody hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me? Just say something.
Yes, David. Yes,
David,
David.
can you hear me?
Yes, David.
Philip, are you on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Philip, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Yeah, Philip, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh, so there's a problem. So where is Lekon? Okay, I think the problem is from here. So I think others can hear you, but I can't hear you. So, okay, that's fine then. So if the larger audience can hear, so that's fine. So let's project David's slides, and we can start with that. So the next session is on using the 5-case model to develop an outline business case. And this will be presented by Abdul Oladapo, who is a portfolio management lead for UKNAF, and David Wright, who is a senior advisor, PPP and project finance. So I'm just going to project that now while they sort out the sound issue for us. If you can hear us, I think that's good. Abdul is going to take that session now. I hope you can see my slides. Okay, Abdul, I think you should be on now.
They won't hear me.
They can hear you.
Just that I know they need to hear.
No, these people would hear. The larger audience will hear. The larger audience can hear. They still having the problem.
Yes, still having it, but we need them to.
So
it's been sorted, right? I love doing it.
okay, David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. I can hear you now as well. All right, so we are on. Let's do this. Okay, Abdul should be on now. I hope you all can see my slides. Can you see the slides, David?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can. Perfect. Thank you. Abdul is on now.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Gabriel. We'll be looking at 5-case model to develop an outline business case. I think it doesn't need a lot of, well, outline business cases do not need a lot of background, a lot of information, because this is, those of us in the PPP space, this is one of the major things we do during project preparation to check the viability of delivering projects by PPP. But the 5-case model is a methodology that is used for business cases generally, and this came out of the UK. And an international guidance has been prepared, and it's been put out there for other countries to adopt. So I'll be giving, I'm giving this little background, but I'll be yielding to David shortly to give most of the presentation. Then I will now discuss its applicability specifically in Nigeria, and also have an interactive session with you so that you can really see the different elements of the 5-case model and how it aligns with the kind of business cases we produce in Nigeria currently. And really the 5-case model, it is split into, yes, 5 cases, and that's the strategic case, the economic case, the commercial case, the financial case, and the management case. So David, over to you to take this on.
Thanks, Abdul. Could you turn off your sound? That's it. Well done. Thank you. I was hearing myself, which is not always a very pleasant thought. Okay, as Abdul said, the 5-case model is not surprisingly made up of 5 cases. Before I start, I ought perhaps to say that I'm a former UK civil servant, and back in the early 1990s, I actually had to write outline business cases. I procured the first 2 PFI, PPP prisons, and a number of early schools as a civil servant. So I had to write and supervise the writing of outline business cases. It is not always an easy document to complete, but in my view, attempting to complete an outline business case is very important, because if you cannot complete it, that suggests, almost by definition, that insufficient planning and data gathering has taken place. even then, it's not always possible to do things in a perfect way. And the other thing which has struck me over the years is that what is being advised in how to plan to deliver a project is no different from what we do in our day-to-day lives. If we are thinking of buying a new car, for example, we should perhaps be asking ourselves similar questions. Is it strategically necessary? Interesting concept in relation to one's own domestic lives. Does it make sense economically? Can we actually buy what we want to buy? Does it really represent the best value solution? Buying a new car nowadays, is that really the best option? Is it affordable? Can we actually handle the deliverability of it? So really, there's nothing particularly difficult about preparing an outline business case if you think of it in those terms. But in relation to infrastructure projects, in particular in relation to PPP, procured in a particular way, projects, then we've got some issues that perhaps need to be addressed, and the experience and expertise of people who've tried to do it, if shared properly, and that's partly what we're trying to do here today, if shared properly, might lead to other people being able to do outline business cases perhaps more efficiently and certainly more effectively than I and my colleagues managed a long time ago in the 1990s. So let's move on. Next slide, please. Now, international best practice. I'm always a bit nervous about coming from the United Kingdom to any country, and in the last 20 years I've been to many countries, trying to share my knowledge, share my expertise in an environment that I do not know. And I'm here again doing that exactly the same thing this afternoon with you. International best practice, I prefer to call it the collective wisdom of people who've tried and failed, tried and succeeded in various parts of the world in preparing for an infrastructure project as successfully as possible. And we know that is needed because there are lots and lots of examples all over the world, in the United Kingdom, and everywhere, where projects have not been as successful as people had hoped. Now, this particular guidance that's been produced by my government has been turned into a document that can be used in Nigeria and in fact in any other jurisdiction. This is its genesis. Next slide, please. Just to show that this isn't a UK model trying to be imposed on anybody, it has been created in the context, a wider context of the G20 principles for infrastructure project preparation, the so-called G20 principles. The expectation is that if this guidance is followed, then these issues will be dealt with as effectively as possible. So why is the project required? Have different options for meeting a strategic need being considered? Is the project, in relation to a PPP project, is it commercially viable? In other words, can you create a business out of it? Can it be afforded in the short, medium and long term? And can it actually be delivered? And this is about trying to improve the quality of infrastructure, economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, in meeting the UN SDGs, and I'll cover that on the next slide. So if Nigeria chooses to follow this guidance, which by the way I believe is entirely consistent with the ICRC guidance and the guidance that I've seen in at least one state, or the law in one state, I believe it's consistent with that, but it goes perhaps in some respects further in trying to create a mechanism for preparing good quality infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So, in relation to the SDGs, this approach to support social sustainability and to support environmental sustainability is particularly valuable. We are all, in every country, trying to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Doesn't matter which country we're in. If you use this methodology, then you will be contributing towards using infrastructure to help with inclusive economic growth. I'll come on to some examples in a minute. And in relation to environmental sustainability, something that's particularly important to my government at the moment, trying to use the development and delivery of infrastructure to positively impact the negative impacts of climate change, reducing them or eliminating them where possible. And this can be done. There are many examples and there's a lot of guidance. And again, I will come on to that in the next slide or two. So using this methodology, as well as delivering better quality infrastructure for your own citizens, you're also contributing to wider regional. Hello, is that somebody talking to me? Hello? No, somebody must have had the microphone on. Sorry about the interruption to everybody. Now, in relation to these two SDGs, UK NIAF has developed a tool, next slide please, which will help in determining the extent to which a potential project will be contributing to the positive meeting of these goals. And so this is what's called the PGSE and Climate Change tool, PGSE and CC tool. It's an Excel spreadsheet into which you can all put data in relation to your own projects. This will help you to understand whether there are particular characteristics of your project that really you should be trying to address if you're going to be meeting these goals. It will also lead you to consider whether by shaping the structure of the project you might be able to have a greater beneficial impact. So next slide please. It's an Excel spreadsheet and I'm just going to put up one slide here, next, which just indicates essentially there are 5 tabs to the spreadsheet. The first one being the guidance note. Then on tab 2 you've got the scoring methodology. You will be asked to put in data that will allow an environmental and social risk assessment to be made. Is this good? Is it bad? How good is it? How bad is it? The next section will relate to climate change, mitigation and adaptation measures. And the third element would be the extent to which the project might be addressing poverty issues, gender and inclusion. And by putting data into this Excel spreadsheet, the output from that will be an indication as to the extent to which this project, as currently envisaged, will be good or bad or ugly. Okay, so this will be made freely available to you, and we are using it on projects that we are supporting now. So next slide, please. It's important to note that this guidance, which is freely available, it is extensive, but it can be adapted for in-country use. And in fact, what we're doing at the moment in UK NIAF is trying it out on real projects. And we are already beginning to understand how it might need to be shaped to fit into the Nigerian context. It's suitable for every type of project and program. So if you're looking at a rural electrification program or projects, you could use this methodology to assess options for delivering the program, whether the program itself is likely to represent good value for money, and so on. And then you can drop down into individual projects and use the same methodology. It can be used for economic projects, or horizontal projects, as some people call them, environmental ones and social ones. In fact, it can be used for almost anything that doesn't move. Well, actually some things that do move as well. You can procure buildings, so you could rationalize an MDA's estate using PPP, and that would have a beneficial effect upon, for example, public expenditure. It is scalable. It can be applied at any level of government. I've applied it at local authority level. I've applied it in a very, very small island state. And of course, you can do it at state level and also at national, federal level. Next slide, please. The 5 cases, as Abdul said, they're all given a one-word name: strategic, economic, commercial, financial, and management. They all link into one another. However, each of these individual cases is focusing on a particular aspect of the project and the environment in which the project is being considered. And I'm going to go through each of these into a reasonable amount of detail, but obviously not too much in the time I've got. Think of this as a collection of data gathering and analysis exercises, all of which should be combined to answer those basic questions on the first slide. Is the project strategically necessary? Is this a contribution to the realization of a vision? Is it? Can you answer that positively and truthfully? Is this part of the plan to move us towards the vision, either for the country, the state, or indeed for the MDA responsible for a particular sector? So look at your own vision statement, and is this part of the plan to get there? Because a vision without a plan is just a dream. And of course, the other way around, a dream without a vision is an absolute nightmare. And that's sometimes you get into that when there's no real vision. What is this project really designed to do? Is it strategically necessary? Then once you've got past that stage, which often people think that's the easy bit, it's not, shouldn't be. Is the project economically and socially desirable? Are the net benefits greater than the costs? And some of those benefits, of course, are very difficult to, or impossible to quantify. How do you deal with that? Then once you get past that stage, okay, it's desirable. But is there anybody out there who's going to play the game with us? Is there a market out there from which you can buy the infrastructure and the services? Then can you afford it? And finally, again, it's funny, isn't it? In my opinion, the strategic and management cases are the parts, the elements of the overall business case that are given the least attention. Everybody's thinking about how much is it going to cost? Does it represent good value for money? Is there a market? But actually, if it's not worth doing, you shouldn't be doing it anyway. And if the MDA is not competent, does not have the capacity or the confidence to deliver it, there's no point even thinking about the project. And I always advise governments to think about those two first. Because if you can't manage the project, then you will end up with the private sector managing it and doing what the private sector does best. Well, it doesn't always, what it should do best. It should try and make as much money out of this project as easily as possible, because that's what it's there to do for its owners. It's very important to think about the management case, and I might spend a bit more time on that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. The strategic case, on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the the tagline, the rationale for the project. How does it fit into the wider context? So the elements of the strategic case is essentially a case for change, isn't it? The reason you're thinking about doing this project is that you want to move from where you are today to somewhere else. The vision. So breaking down that, making the case for change, you've got to describe what it is you want this project to achieve in the context of the real world in which we live. What are the objectives? And then describe where we are today and where we want to get to. Once you've thought about these, what are the objectives? Are they economic objectives? Are they financial objectives? Are there particular benefits that you're wanting to be achieved in this project? What are those objectives? Half a dozen of key objectives. That's important. Half a dozen key objectives, because what should happen, and often doesn't happen in outline business cases, is that you should be looking at options. How many people start off writing business cases when there's only one option? And you're making a case for an option. You're not actually making a case for the delivery of something new, or making the case for a journey to a better place. But you're trying to make the case for an option that's already been predetermined. Now, it might have been dealt with in another earlier document, like a pre-feasibility study, fine, but then that needs to be brought into the strategic case. We know where we are today. We don't want to stay here. We want to move to a better place. And this is how we're going to measure it, objectives. People will feel safer when they go on the transport project. People will start doing some work and realize they're going to have power 24 hours a day. Whatever it is, objectives. How could we deliver those objectives? How could we get to where we are now to where we want to be? There will be options. And this is the place where those options should be considered. For every option, maybe 2, 3 or 4 options, what are the benefits? Also, what are the risks for each of those options? And then the environment in which we're working. What are the constraints? What are the dependencies on other projects and programs? So you see, the strategic case is really the fundamental building block of the document that's called the outline business case. Really important. Next slide, please. Now, taking those items quickly, developing objectives. Normally, when you're looking at what are we wanting to achieve in a project to reach the point you want to get to, your vision, they normally fall into one of 5. There may be 2 or 3. But it's quite a good idea to think about these. They might be about reducing cost. So some agricultural processing projects will be about reducing cost, also improving productivity, possibly improving quality. There may be some statutory or regulatory requirements that have to be met in a sector, and therefore a project might be helping to address that. This may be compliance with SDGs. Replacement. Again, that's you wanting to replace something that is about to expire. If you don't replace it, then public services will be dramatically reduced. So, and these objectives are best developed with key stakeholders, not just internally. There is a real problem in government that a lot of this is done in a silo. Although it takes time, and of course, by the time you're doing an outline business case, everybody's wanting it to be done very quickly, you really ought to try and make time to find out what the real objectives should be. If you're in the public sector, you're doing things in the public interest. Well, how about finding out what the public really want? Is that really so difficult? Well, yes, it is, but it ought to be tried nonetheless, in my opinion. Now, objectives, again, it needs to be said because it's not always the easiest thing to do, but objectives should be smart. Now, this is where I could find out whether anybody's still awake by asking you all to say, give me an example of a smart output measure, or at least tell me what SMART stands for. Now, unfortunately, I'm not in the room, and so I can't walk round and say, why are you sleeping? But there should be high-level smart output measures for each objective. Because at some point, these are going to go into a contract. Therefore, they need to be unambiguous. And we might have time to talk about that later on. Next slide, please. Critical success factors. Now, what is going to make this project a success or not? What are the critical things? These are different from objectives, but taken together, they can then be used to measure the various options that you've come up with. All right, so not surprisingly, the guidance advises you to think about critical success factors in the context of the strategic fit. You need to be able to say for each option you're analysing, how well does this option meet the needs and objectives of the project and the broader strategic aims? How does this option maximise, rather than optimise, I think, the potential benefits, taking into account costs and risks? And there's a definition of value for money, which in your last session you heard some discussion about. How realistically achievable is the option? Affordability, deliverability. So think about this in the context of an analysis of a number of options. How well does it meet the objectives? And how well do they meet these critical success factors? Or to what extent do the critical success factors exist in those options? Okay, next slide, please. Then we go on to developing those options. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to? What is the current situation? It's presumably inadequate for whatever reason, because otherwise you wouldn't be spending time and money on this project. Understand the opportunity to do things better. What are the opportunities in the project to improve the quality of the service, to reduce its cost, to improve its efficiency, and so on? These problems and opportunities should be matched by a corresponding objective. So focusing on objectives, the critical success factors, look at the options to moving you from where you are now to where you want to get to. Next slide, please. Benefits and risks. I don't want to spend much time on this because this is, in a sense, the easy bit. What are the benefits? Think widely. Don't just think within your own sector, within your own state. Think about the wider benefits to yourselves as the MDA responsible for delivering the public service in that sector, the wider public sector, the immediate community, and the rest of the country. Now, clearly, at an outline business case stage, you can't really have got too far down the line of benefits. They will be high level, but particularly dropping out of the PGESI and climate change tool, you will have some quantitative and qualitative benefits and disbenefits, risks. And you've got to do the same with all the other areas. What are the benefits and what are the risks, the constraints, the dependencies? And one of the risks, quite honestly, is often we don't really have enough data to calculate this. Where you've got gaps, you can't do certain things, that is a risk. It's a risk to the project and it needs to be identified. So with some options to solve the challenge or the problem you've got, some of the risk will be, we're actually finding it quite difficult to calculate which represents best value for money. Well, does that mean you stop? Maybe, maybe not. But there's a risk there and you've got to think about how you plan to mitigate that risk. Will you have to undertake another survey or a new survey or bring up to date an old survey, for example? Next slide, please. Well, there we are. You've now done the strategic case. Well, that wasn't too bad, was it? Now, we'll move on to the economic case, which is probably where a lot of you have a lot of information and understanding already. The economic case is essentially taking those options and
sorry, 1 minute, David. Umar Idris, can you switch off your camera?
Sorry, hello?
Umar Mahmoud Idris, please switch off your camera. Yeah, sorry, David, just 1 minute.
Okay. So, the content of the economic case. This is one of the areas, the meat of the outline business case. In fact, a lot of people focus on the economic case because it's really getting to a point where you do an analysis and you end up with a preferred option. Well, that's the theory anyway. What tends to happen in a lot of cases is there is a preferred option already. It may not be written down, it may be written down. And now this part of the case is justifying that selection. It's a pity that it isn't done properly, but that's often the way things are done. At the very least, at this point, there ought to be some attempt made at considering other options. Quite clearly, the business as usual option, unless that is completely incredible for some reason or other, the business as usual option should be there as a yardstick against which the other options can be measured. Typically, the advice is to do something, to have 3 options, which will be the do minimum, the least possible, to try and make some progress towards meeting the objectives. Then there's probably going to be a core option. This is what you really want to achieve as a minimum, truly, even though there is something else you could do that's less than that. And then you might have something beyond that, which is if we can do it, this would be great option, but we suspect it might not be possible. We suspect at this stage, now let's test that, because you might find that you can actually do better than you think. All right, next slide, please. So you've got a long list of options. Now, what you're going to do is whittle those down sensibly to 3 or 4. Most people can't think of more than 3 or 4 options, to be quite honest. And then you've got to do an appraisal of the costs and benefits of each. A cost-benefit analysis. All right. Now, there's something I put in here, optimism bias adjustment. One of the problems in the public sector of predicting the costs of things is that we normally get it wrong. And this is particularly so in relation to infrastructure projects, and it is especially so in relation to the costs. And therefore there is guidance as to what you should do about this. Optimism bias adjustment. That's a fancy term for saying we really do need to put some contingency in here because we know it's going to cost more than that. We're just doing what we can at the moment from data we've got from other projects, if there are any, or somebody's guessed. Now, it's best to expose that at this stage so that those who have to make a decision on whether this project should proceed or not, knowing that there are risks associated with it, one of which is we have underestimated the cost. Now, a risk assessment has to be done for each option, because depending upon the option, the risks will be different. I mean, put very quickly, the lower the expectation, the fewer the risks. The higher the expectation, the greater the risks. But in any case, whatever you do, you've got to do some sensitivity analysis on the assumptions you're making. So what if we've got the running costs of this project wrong? Well, let's just see what happens if we increase them by 10%, another 10%. What happens if we've got the financing assumptions wrong? Then in fact, a company will not be able to borrow at 7.5%, but in fact, it's going to be Let's add on another 1%. What does that do to the financing costs? What does that do to the overall case? Do those additional costs outweigh the benefits for each of the options? As a result of that analysis, you end up with a preferred option. Okay, so next slide, please. The commercial case. The purpose of this element of the outline business case is that you should be able to demonstrate that as a result of the information you have, you believe that this project is commercially viable. In other words, it is a business, and that it is bankable. And what that means is that whoever is going to be the private sector partner will be able to access a combination of debt and equity. People who are prepared to invest in the project and lenders who are prepared to lend to the project. And having provided evidence for that, the business case, this part of the business case, should indicate the procurement strategy. And technically, this is where the decision is made as to whether to continue with this project using traditional procurement methods or whether to use what is called PPP. And the procurement strategy has obviously got to be in accordance with any procurement laws that you have, and also has to be in accordance with the expectations of the private sector. And I'll come on to that in a moment if I have the time. But the commercial case is all about assessing the extent to which the private sector can play a part in it. Whatever way the private sector plays its part, there needs to be a careful analysis of not just what you want the private sector to do, that is the service requirements, but also how it's going to be paid for. What risks are you transferring to the private sector? Or put another way, what obligations are going to be in the contract that are obligations for the private sector party to that contract? And there needs to be some evidence of thinking as to what will be going into that contract. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full draft contract, because at this stage in the process you haven't actually got approval to proceed to the transaction stage. But at the very least, there should be what are called heads of terms or key contractual terms. And if this is pointed out, personnel implications, which may or may not apply in Nigeria. But this is an area that sometimes gets left to the last minute. If there's an existing service being provided, and what you're asking the private sector to do is to improve the infrastructure necessary for that service to be provided, and you're saying to the private sector, we'd actually like you to run it. Well, if there are people in the public sector or in another company already running the service, what happens to them? Now, whatever has to happen by law, or whatever ought to happen, it needs to be thought about, and it needs to be part of the procurement strategy. Also, part of the commercial case deals with something that's going to have an impact on the next case, which is the financial case, and that is the accountancy treatment of the project. Most countries are today in a situation where they really do not want to take on any more debt. There are governments today around the world who do not want to take on further debt because of the impact. Well, I don't need to explain that. Now, in relation to PPP projects, we're not talking now about non-PPP projects. There is no doubt the asset will be on the government's balance sheet and will therefore incur additional debt to service those liabilities. In relation to PPP, there are still some people around the world who think that PPP is a way of getting assets off the government's balance sheet onto the private sector's balance sheet, or a company somewhere in the private sector. Well, my advice, which may not be the advice you'll get from anybody else, is always to assume that the whole of that asset will have to be accounted for on the government's balance sheet. If you're lucky, you may be able to structure a project so that part of the asset is on, well, it is shared between the public and the private sector. The number of projects that would lead to an accounting treatment that is off the government's balance sheet, that number is very, very small indeed. And if you manage to identify some, that's good, but you'll soon run out of them. And so my advice is always plan for the worst. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. This has to be dealt with in the commercial case. Clearly, accountancy advice is going to be required. But do not fall into the trap of trying to make the case fit what you think everybody wants. This document is supposed to be an honest document. And if it were properly regulated, then any dishonesty or covering up of the truths would be exposed. It's best to assume that you've got lots of people crawling over your business case trying to find little chinks. Next slide, please. So the next one, the financial case. People from the Ministry of Finance, etc., will be pricking their ears up now, I hope. Right, the financial case, as it says on the right-hand side, should demonstrate affordability, not just in any capital that might be required, but more importantly, any payments to be made out of revenue accounts. And also, for some reason it's not explicit here, well, it's implicit. Contingent liabilities. It is sometimes easy to think of a structure that is commercially viable, represents very good value for money, and is on the face of it affordable. But then pause and think, it's affordable if everything goes according to plan. One of the risks associated with completing and relying upon a financial case, one of the risks is that when you get to the final point of negotiating with the preferred bidder, in order to sign the contract, you might just have to give them a little guarantee that if everything goes wrong, that you, the state or the ministry, will just make sure that the project is rescued. Now, this is often the case where in say a transport project, where the commercial viability of the project and its bankability depend upon people using the service and paying for it. Think of a grain aggregation store. The project is commercially viable if the farmers, when they come and ask the owners to buy their ginger, their whatever, that the users are prepared to pay. What happens if they don't? Now, if I were investing in the project, I want to have some guarantee that if the revenue fell below a certain level, then I'd expect the government to help out. This is, after all, a public service. So from the financial, the fiscal perspective, you're looking at what are the requirements, the immediate capital requirements, if the MDA is going to be providing some sort of capital provision to help with the financing of the project? What will be the effect, if any, on prices? What will be the impact on the balance sheet? And what will be the impact on the income and expenditure account, if it's relevant? And in this case, we've got to think about possible income coming in. Overall funding and affordability. And there are all sorts of little issues. Just make sure that you, when you're getting the budget for your operation or your revenue budget, that it does include an amount that relates to the value-added tax. Because the private sector is going to be billing you and adding VAT to it. And if you haven't thought about that and got approval from the Ministry of Finance for that, although it's neutral as far as the budget is concerned, it's not neutral as far as your own accounts are concerned. What are the other issues that come up from time to time? Well, I'll leave it to that point. Next slide, please. The management case. Final one. Okay, we've gone through the process. It's strategically important. It represents very good value for money. The benefits exceed the costs. We reckon it's commercially viable. Talk to the market. They seem very happy with it. We've done the fiscal, financial analysis. That seems okay too. Well, if we allow you, state or ministry, to go ahead with this, let's just have a look. How are you going to manage this project? You're wanting to move to a transaction stage. You want to procure this as through a transparent, legal form procurement. How are you going to do that? Because we know that you're going to need technical advisors, you're going to need legal advisors, you're going to need financial advisors. So what arrangements have you made or are you going to make to procure that technical assistance? What internal resources have you got? Explain. When you move from procurement, let's assume you prove that you're competent and you have the capacity to manage a procurement, and you come back to us with a full business case in due course saying we recommend that we sign with a preferred bidder. You do that because you've updated the management case. You sign the contract. What happens on day one? Day one, you'll start getting queries from the contractor. Oh, we've just started work. By the way, so we need to know what your contract management arrangements are. Do you have a specialist contract management unit? If so, are they competent to manage a PPP contract? Who are they? What skills have they got? What are those arrangements? Are you in a position to respond to requests for changes? That's the traditional contract management role. And most MDAs might say, yes, that's fine. We're used to managing contracts. We've got the right sort of people. Although I would say that managing a PPP contract is more than contract management. You've got to think about relationship management as well. And that's the subject for another day. I've had to do this. Now on the right-hand side of those two columns, we get into some other areas. Benefits realization. The outline business case and the final business case, full business case, will be based partly on the assertion that the benefits outweigh the costs. What are you going to do to measure the benefits? How are you going to measure benefits? That's something that is often not thought about and even less often done. But it is important that if this document means anything, that all of that analysis, it's taking a lot of effort, should be worth something. So there needs to be a benefits realization strategy stroke plan. If the benefits include people feel safer, for example, well, how are you going to measure that? Answer, regular surveys. If the benefits are economic, in other words, things are going to be cheaper, how are you going to measure that? What data will you be collecting that will allow you to provide an analysis? Okay, that's one plan. The next plan is the risk management plan. In the OBC and in the contract itself, there will be a crystallization of the risks and who's responsible for managing them. So quite clearly there will be obligations on the public sector party, and the failure to deliver on those obligations will lead to consequences. There is a risk that that will happen. So how are you going to manage it? Who is going to be managing the obligations of the public party? We have to produce reports. We have to respond within 10 days to some things, or whatever it is in the contract. So lots of risks. What about the unforeseen risks? How is that? How are those going to be identified? Well, you've done a good job in the outline business case. There needs to be a risk register carried forward into the live operation of projects. And someone needs to be looking after that. Have those risks reduced? Have they increased? Have some risks disappeared? Have others appeared? Monitoring is linked to that and is part of contract management. If the private sector party is being paid, provided that they deliver certain outputs, which are smart and therefore measurable, M for measurable, then someone needs to be measuring their performance. Now, in brackets, it says proportionate. In some contracts, that process is unbelievably labyrinthine and detailed, and it doesn't need to be. Monitoring should be applied to those key objectives, which I mentioned at the beginning of the economic case. Post-implementation evaluation arrangements, which will cover most of those other areas. The evaluation of benefits, particularly, is critical. Then contingency arrangements. What is the thinking in the MDA about being able to respond to force majeure events or unexpected events that are not force majeure events? That requires blue sky thinking sometimes, and actually we've got a day job to do. But these are long-term contracts. If for no other reason, for the sake of those who come after you and the people who come after them and the people who come after them, there is evidence around the world. In fact, if you go to the United Kingdom, if you go to parts of Canada, Australia and South Africa, countries that have done quite a lot of PPPs and have done it for some time, there are horror stories. Who could possibly have predicted that over a period of 20 years, 2 major suppliers of PPP services would go bankrupt? Now you might say, well, one, we can imagine that that could happen and nobody'd actually planned for it. But the second one, and those who are in the know, they'll know who I'm talking about. Jarvis Contractors, and the second one more recently, Carillion. Now, if it happens a third time in the United Kingdom, that would just be almost criminal. The point I'm making is, you should all know that now. Then, well, if you do have a decent PPP program in Nigeria, then at some point, somebody providing services, perhaps to too many MDAs and states, will get into difficulties. If they do, what's the plan? And it can be planned for. Whether the plans will be successful or not is another matter, but at least people will be thinking about it. There will be some documentation. Because this is going to happen, and it's likely to happen 10, 15, 20 years into a program. Next slide, please. what does this all mean in terms of effort? The Treasury document is quite, I think this is very good. Now they refer to three separate documents: the early case, the intermediate case they call it, and the final or the full business case. It doesn't really matter what these are called. Generally speaking, in every country there are three stages in increasing detail that support the decision-making process at various points. So if we take the early business case or the project concept notes with pre-feasibility studies and anything like that, the suggestion is that on the strategic case, you actually manage to cover about, well, over half of the material that you need for the final business case. The strategic, making the case, most of that's done up front, followed by a significant proportion of the economic case. Now, this will vary. In some countries, and I suspect Nigeria might be one of them, less will be done at the early business case or the project concept note stage than this. Half of the economic case is a lot, and I reckon it's going to be nearer to 30% myself. Not a lot can be done on the commercial case at this stage. More can be done on the financial case because that's more about an early indication of costs. And management's too far away to worry about. That's the sort of characteristic of that. Next slide, please. Now, we're talking about the outline business case. Now, when you complete the outline business case, and I think this is very realistic, you need to be about 80% of the way there on the strategic case, if not further than that. You need to be pretty confident about the economic case and all of them. This is the point, you see, where you're going to be asking for significant input of resources, technical advisors, even the civil servants, public officials who are doing this, even if they don't think they're going to have to do a lot of work in the transaction stage. Trust me, I've done it. I've procured 2 prisons, I've procured 3 schools, and I've had to do it as a public official. So it will take a lot of time. But the outline business case itself, which is, if you like, the critical point at which there must be enough information for the approval authority to be confident that it is worth spending a lot of time and a lot of money on procuring a PPP contractor. And that can be a great deal of money, trust me. So that's why now the orange bars are showing a quite significant increase in the amount of time. Next slide, please. And there we are. The final business case completes it. And next, or is that it? Next slide, please. I'm not sure these slides should be there, but I may be wrong, Abdul. I've already said all of this. Abdul, are you there? This
Yes,
is London. London calling Abdul.
I'm here, David. I'm here, David.
All right.
Okay, so I'll. Do you have any more things to add, or should I take it from here?
I think you should, because I've overrun my time and I probably bored everybody to sleep.
I hope not. Or should we ask them?
Yes, actually, put your hands up, everybody who's still awake. Now, I told you 3.
Great job, David. Great job.
Okay, come on.
I am awake. I am awake.
All right.
Nice.
All right. So there are 7 of you. Great. Okay, that's fine. All right. Over to you, Abdul.
Thanks a lot for that, David. So looking at the ICRC, they do have a a template for outline business cases, which has been there for a number of years. And this is generally what we advisors the guidance we use to prepare business cases in Nigeria. But interestingly, for me, personal experience, when I started preparing business cases over 10 years ago, yes, I don't have 30 plus years experience like David, but I do have some years of experience. One of the first samples I did look at then was the 5-case model. Maybe one of the reasons probably being that, I used to work in the UK before I moved back to Nigeria. And also UK have been doing PPPs for a very long time, and they have a lot of published material. A lot of courses we attend are by British experts. So there was a lot of that. And that has, I think the approach to doing that has also shaped my preparing OBCs in general. But when we look at the ICRC methodology, you do see that it has, well, apart from the introduction, there are 6 key sections. The first section, apart from the introduction, is the strategic and local context of the project. And that effectively aligns with the strategic case. The second aspect, which is the project appraisal, that effectively is the core of the economic case. However, there's one more aspect of it, which is the options analysis. If you go down, that is part of the economic case as well. So, but instead of presenting your options early on, which the 5-case model proposes or recommends, the ICRC template puts it closer to the end. Then the risk analysis is the bulk of the commercial case. So a lot of the commercial case is where the risk analysis is. Then if financial and economic appraisal, that's most of the financial case. Some elements of the economic case as well will be included in there, but that's consistent more with the financial case. And the implementation recommendations, that is the management case. But really, when we look at the 5-case model, the management case, it goes a lot beyond what the ICRC recommends to be included. And a lot of these things are actually very important. Even thinking about it at the outline business case, we advisors tend to look at it more when we're doing the final business case after the procurement is done. But it's actually important for this to be included. Things like the benefits realization plan, then also being able to significantly assess the capacity of the MDA to deliver the project as well. A lot of that should be in the outline business case rather than waiting to the final business case. And that last point takes me to a very important aspect of why some elements of the 5-case model would be beneficial to be adopted in Nigeria. And I will put it in some way by saying the 5-case model significantly helps the government, the MDAs, to manage advisors rather than advisors managing government. And the reason why I say that is in Nigeria, a lot of the time, a consultant is engaged to an OBC. They'd have an inception meeting and they run away. Then they come back and present a draft business case. And that's not supposed to be the case. The government should drive the process of preparing the business case. And when you look at the 5-case model, there are very important elements of it, which is to workshops. So one workshop is done at the strategic case. 2 workshops are done at the economic case. So you have a workshop where the advisor now brings out all the key elements of the project and you have a detailed discussion. All the stakeholders in government that are relevant to that project will have to be brought in the room, even from different MDAs. So you actually have all the sessions to ensure government significantly contributes to what goes into the business cases. And when you get to the economic case, you have one workshop for options analysis, and you have another workshop when you select your preferred option to look at it in detail. So you do, and so on, and other cases have their own workshops as well. So what you now see is that when a business case is developed for a project, it does reflect what government really seeks to achieve from this project, which is going to be a real step change from what generally happens now, where business cases are prepared, presented, and whilst the comments might be provided, but sometimes they are not extensive enough to significantly change or steer the work that has been done. Now, what that also does is that having those workshops also significantly improves capacity within the government as well, because you now have the different advisors within the advisory team having their, actually transferring knowledge from the discussions they need to have around the technical issues, around the financial issues, around the legal issues, the commercial issues. So this exchange enables that collaboration between governments, MDAs, and the advisors in preparing these. So I think at this point, I would like to take questions. For some of them, I would answer them, and in some cases, I'll defer to David to respond. I think we'll start from questions from the room. When my colleague is back, he'll be able to provide questions that the attendees virtually have asked already. Okay, anyone? You can put your hand up if you have a question. Questions?
Okay, yes. Okay, thank you, Abdul. Thank you, David. I think we have a few questions on already. Anyone in the room? Okay, the room is always quiet. Let's see the chat box. Okay, thank you, Khadija. I see you're responding to some of the questions already, particularly the ones on FEMA. So the question on public finance management and public investment management, you're going to get a reference material for that. So it will be part of the package of materials you receive. So you will download that from the portal. Okay, so let's see the hands that are up. We have Ignatius. Ignatius, if you can hear me, you can unmute and ask your question.
Sorry, I wasn't actually answering. I wasn't answering the question. I was raising hand when he said if you are still with me.
All right, thank you. You can put it down now. Okay, so there is Joy. Joy, do you have a question or?
Okay, I raised my hand when he asked if we're still there with him.
Okay, you can put it down as well, eh?
Okay.
Philibus Daniel.
Really, I also raised my hand up when he asked that we should.
Okay, so why don't you just put down your hands? So anyone with hands up, so put down your hands. Let's be sure of those that are. I mean, Uma distracted us seriously today, so I'm not even. So we tried to reach you several times to switch off your video, but you were not part of the session. You were doing quite other stuff. So I'm not sure you have a question. Do you have a question, Uma?
I see somebody else has written a question in the meeting chat.
Okay, you can read it out.
What type of PPP model is being adopted for the recently planned concessioned highways in Nigeria? Abdul.
Okay, so I don't think that's aligned with this presentation, because I think Abdul was talking about the 5 case model. I think Abdul will need a bit more information about the project. I think it's about the HDMI, that's the Highway Development Management Initiative by the Ministry of Works. So we are aware of the project, but we don't have enough details to respond to that, except there's someone else in the room that has enough detail to respond to that. Is anybody from Works? Ministry of Works? Anybody online from Ministry of Works who can provide more details? Because I think you will need to read through the structure of the contract before you can decide what type of PPP it is, or the structure of what's proposed. Okay, so while we wait for anyone that has more information on HDMI, Hawa Yahaya has her hand up. Hawa, do you have a question? Okay, let's go to Ene Leo. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, Hawa.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good
Actually, I
afternoon.
raised my hand earlier to ask Mr. Wolemi regarding, I don't know if I can still ask my question.
So your hand has been up all that while?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. Should be hurting by now. I'm sorry. So what was the question?
Okay. No, looking at one of his slides that talks about the key principles of risk allocation. So the one that talks about the risk allocation should be given to the best party that can bear the risk, and then the other one that talks about risk allocation should be politically acceptable. So I don't know, looking at the two principles, how do you marry the two without compromising one of the principles?
Okay, I hope Wolemi is on, but I'm not sure. Wolemi, are you on? Awa, you can type the question in the box. We'll get back to you. Okay, just type it in the box. We're going to collate all those questions we've not responded to.
Okay, no problem. I'll do that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I still see Enelio. Enelio, are you on now?
I'm okay.
I'm what? Okay, your hand is up.
Yeah.
You have a question?
I do.
Okay, please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you very well.
Okay. Please, can I ask a question to Philip Kelly that took us on financing?
Okay.
My question to Philip Kelly is, as he mentioned, that currently, that without funding, there will be no private financing. So my question to him is, currently, do we have enough or adequate funding for private finance initiatives and PPPs in our country or in Black African continent at large? That is my key question to him. And again, we observe that projects fail to attract government funding are left for PPP funding. How can we change the narrative or the trend in this part of the globe that it is only projects that fail to attract government funding that that is left for PPP? How do we change the narrative here? Those are my two questions.
Thank you. Yes, the point has been made a number of times over the last few days about private financing and raising financing. But the key point is that nobody is going to invest either as a sponsor investing equity or as a lender lending money to the project unless they are assured of funding, in other words, revenue from either government availability payments or user payments. It's like unless there is a certainty of a revenue stream from those two sources, which are the only two sources, there will be no private financing forthcoming. On the question of the capacity of a country to pay, well, the capacity will depend obviously on the economic growth of the country, on the uses of finance that it has and the value that it's getting from existing finance. One of the points where we're saying is that, there is asset recycling as a possibility for countries. There are various ways of improving the efficiency of existing assets through improved asset management and so on, to generate scope for using more finance and funding to generate more space for funding new projects. I'm not sure if I've answered your questions for you, but I take your point that everybody does analysis of investment, of the investment gap and the investment need, and shows that countries are providing lower levels of services and facilities than even comparable countries of the same income level. And people are showing how much money you need to raise and to spend in order to generate the finance to carry out those projects. But that money will not be forthcoming from the private sector unless there are income streams, revenue streams there to pay for it, and that needs to be assessed from how much scope has the government, if the government is making the availability payments, or the users, how much scope have they for paying these for these projects.
Okay, that's fine, sir.
Can I? Is it permissible for me just to make a comment here?
Okay.
In order to change the narrative on this, I think my belief is that there is no shortage of finance. There is plenty of finance around the world, in my experience. The real problem is that there aren't enough good, well-structured projects to receive that finance. And in a sense, what I've been arguing for in producing a well-structured outline business case and structuring the project generally is that in the economic and financial cases, these issues that Philip has addressed have to be considered. So things like, well, and the commercial case, of course. So this is where the cases overlap. You've got to structure a project that will be bankable. You've got to structure a project that can be afforded by the state. So you've got to identify the sources of funding. You've got to ensure that the risks that are perceived by the private sector to exist, for example, political risk, currency volatility risk, inflation risk, these macroeconomic risks can be covered in some way. So that's a matter of linking with export finance organizations, but and availing yourself of certain products and services that are provided by commercial banks, hedging products for dealing with currency volatility, for example. So from my perspective, this is the challenge for Nigeria is to ensure that when projects are prepared for market, that there is a cast iron business case, and that is why we are trying to improve the the quality of business cases. I mean, I have to say the same thing applies in the private sector. I've had to advise private sector clients on how to access financing, in particular commercial lending. And I've had to say to them, you've got to put together a project memorandum that deals with the same issues that we're talking about in a public sector outline business case. And so it's a question of tweaking various elements of the processes to ensure that you produce a well-argued case to whoever is the most important stakeholder. And it applies to the private sector as well. I'll stop there.
David, can I just add something? I think the 5-case business case, and correct me if I'm wrong, is applied in the UK for all projects above a certain size and not just PPP. Is that right?
The Green Book is the book that everybody has to use.
Yes.
The document that the Treasury produced that I've been referring to can be used for programs and projects of any size, and there are certain aspects of the case, of each of the cases, where you have to take a common sense approach and to do work that is proportionate to the size of the project. And in fact, in the guidance itself, it does give advice on how you might be able to dispense with certain aspects of the 5-case model in certain circumstances. But I think the challenge that it is trying to help with is simply making more focused, making more objective the decision-making process. So it's a matter of providing the right information at the right time for the necessary approval. There will always be risks. I won't step out of the door today if I was allowed to, well, I am allowed to, without encountering risks. We can't do anything in life without there being risk. And what we're trying to do, I think, in alerting governments in Nigeria, the state and the federal government in Nigeria, to this guidance is to show that there is a way of reducing the risk associated with the process of developing and delivering an infrastructure project. And that's what it's all about, reducing. It'll never eliminate the risks, but reducing the risks which can be reduced at various stages. Obviously, if it can be done, but you do need competence and capacity to do that. And I would add, and I do try to make this clear to people who listen to me, a third C in all of this is confidence. Please take it from me as someone who's not particularly expert at anything, after all I was a civil servant for many, many years, that if I can do this, anybody can. And I'm not, that's not a trite comment, I'm not a specialist at anything other than trying to make things work. It's not difficult, but it is complex. So there's a difference between complicated and complex. It really isn't. It's a set of processes, and we are helping to identify the sorts of data, that are required, and the time when this data needs to be collected and analysed, and it's about taking decisions on the basis of the best evidence available at the time. Even using this methodology is not going to stop bad projects from being delivered, because some risks will emerge that could not have been foreseen.
I suppose my point really is there a danger that if you require the 5-case business case for PPP projects, but you don't require it for projects that are going into the budget, that will automatically steer people away from having to do the preparation? You see this in a lot of countries where there's a much higher level of requirement of analysis and preparation for the PPP project compared to the one going through the budget, and as a result, the default position becomes the one going to budget.
You're absolutely right, Philip. Which is why when I was discussing the economic case, I made the point that the the selection of the PPP form of procurement should be as a part of an analysis of the different options. Therefore, I should have said it, but by definition, this procedure should be applied to all projects, in my opinion. It should start off, every project should start off as a public investment project. And only as you go through the business case, one of the options might be procuring it in a different way. But the advantages and disadvantages, risks and benefits of the PPP option need to be set alongside others. Like if we do it as a traditional procure project, we might be able to get it done more quickly because the advantages of PPP do not outweigh the benefits of doing this quickly. And that will often be the case for an emergency project, for example. You don't want to spend an extra 6 months on a fairly complex procurement process if there are people dying. You just don't do that sort of thing sensibly. So yes, sorry, I missed your point. This should be the model that all MDAs apply to every single project that comes to their attention to deal with a problem. Thanks for raising it.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Philip, for coming in to respond to some of these questions. Also, thank you, Abdul, for a very good session. Thank you, everyone, for participating and being active and interactive till this time of the day. So we've come to the end of the technical sessions, but quick announcement, you will receive an evaluation link, a link to fill an evaluation form and a feedback information for us. That feedback is very, very important because that's what we will use to determine who gets a certificate of participation. And so please, when you receive the feedback form, please fill it and get back to us as soon as you receive the forms. Secondly, you will receive other reference materials. We want to continue this discussion beyond this week. We'll take this forward with all the MDAs that are participating, but also even other MDAs that wish to join what NIAF is doing. This was just the knowledge development aspect of it. We are looking forward to applying the knowledge we've gotten from this 1 week. We also want to work with you to develop tools and guidelines that would help you with your evaluation processes and assessment processes. Thank you very much. I hope that you all had a wonderful time. We had a good time with you, and we look forward to working with you in future interactions. We're now going to have a closing session. This session will be the closing remark by Obinna Ihedioha. Obinna is the Deputy Managing Director at UK NIAF. He will give us the closing remark. Obinna, please.
Thank you very much. Hello? Hello?
Obinna, we can hear you.
Yeah, Obinna, I can hear you. We can hear you very well.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. Okay, I'm not sure what happened.
I hear you. Okay.
Gabriel, thank you, Kanem. My job is really very, very, very simple. I think it's the simplest of them all. But I would like to say thank you. But just saying thank you would do no justice to the energy, time, commitment from our participants, our presenters, organizers. Therefore, I want to use this opportunity to say it's a great pleasure to witnessing this level of support. The one we got from the Minister of Finance, from the Minister of Works and Housing, from the DGBPE, DGICRC, and MD of Rural Electrification Agency and FEMA. Of course, our funders. Ladies and gentlemen, from our side, I believe that the past 3-4 days really have been very engaging and, of course, enlightening as well. Going with the intensity of the classroom and chat room discussions, I want to believe that you've had a fruitful conversation and discussion. This is a demonstration, just the beginning of the demonstration of how our commitment is in bridging the infrastructure gap and, of course, bridging the capacity deficit where we've noticed in the course of our work in the last 1.5 years. We want to continue to create this level of awareness and addressing some of the key issues that are rife in your mind, and of course, an environment that we live in. This is, of course, the first edition of the capacity training that we've started and the workshop. With the engagement and the level of questions and contribution that we've gathered, we're very much hopeful that we will continue to do this in the months to come, and of course in the years to come, to continue to strengthen our resolve in pushing the limits of what we know. Again, on our side, it's not like we know everything, or not like the participants and those who presented are experts in that. But what they've done, or what the idea is, just to show the thoughts that we have and what we've practiced in various clients that we've existed, and in various clients where we've garnered experience, but also to continue to promote our mutual understanding among participants. And that we saw that coming through from the first day, where we talked about building back and, of course, building greener, developing bankable and smart infrastructure projects. Most of the questions, of course, came from most of you participants. Those are physically there and those who join online. Of course, the quick run around on what we've done in the last couple of days are out there. But just quickly to just mention a few, I think on day one, like I did mention, we talked about the building back and building better, a greener environment in developing bankable PPP projects. We looked at the climate resilient infrastructures, and of course the key questions were asked there. I do remember one that was asked by FOAP about the need for resolving the imminent infrastructure deficits in Nigeria. Of course, that is the idea, to continue to galvanize the energy that we have within. Day two, we looked at infrastructure and sustainable development. We looked at understanding what is infrastructure in the various perspectives that we see it, types of PPPs and terminology issues, where and when we use PPP and how best is being addressed, typical structures for PPP projects, financing PPP projects, causes of project failures in PPP and infrastructure financing. Day three, of course, we looked at introduction of PPP frameworks and process cycle, Nigerian PPP framework, and of course PPP life cycle as well. We looked at budgeting for infrastructure development. We looked at infrastructure finance options, understanding and applying equitable principles, and the Nigerian context for the EPS. And today, I think we've looked at a blend of issues, from decision making to contractual management, developing an outline business case for project preparations, and of course, a PPP project. Clearly, I've observed with very keen interest the excellent presentation from our active discussions from our participants and our presenters. This in no small feat means that we do not know it all. I think we've just generated a lot more energy from those questions that you've asked and some of the ones that we've been able to address. But of course, it is an ongoing exercise, and we'll continue to provide help and support where we think we can come in. And finally, on behalf of the UKNIF team, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all participants for taking our time. Of course, your schedules are very busy. I was very pleased to see most of my bosses very much keen, and of course, they logged in from Monday to now. It's just a show of commitment to making sure that what we do, we try as much as possible to do them much better. So I would like to use this opportunity in my closing remark to say thank you. And I do hope that we've been able to serve you. We've been able to provide a little bit more than what you may have had. And some of the questions you probably would have and want to issue them again, please do feel free to send it. Our network is open, our lines are open. We can reach us on our individual phones or our official emails or personal emails, anyone you have. So I want to use this opportunity to say we've come to the end of this wonderful section. Pardon us if we took too much of your time, but we'll continue to seek ways upon which we can strengthen the resolve for infrastructure deficit in Nigeria. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Very much.
Thank you very much. We've seen questions still coming in. Do not worry, we will compile all these questions. We'll find a way to respond to them. But please follow the Twitter handle. We will have some discussions using the Twitter handle, but also our LinkedIn page, and go to the website. You will see some reference materials there. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, well done, Gabriel. Congratulations. That was a nice one.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I'm not sure who that is. Hey, amazing. Thank you, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done.
You were also very, very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I can see Dr. Liu, who wanted to kill us with quick questions. Thank you, Liu. Leo, you're on mute if you're saying something. I announced it.
Gabriel. Hello, Gabriel. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Gabriel.
Yes, sir.
Please, I hope we will be able to get the course material of all the presentations.
Yes, you're getting them already. So just check the links you used to register. You're getting them already.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.